The rain fell like bullets on the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado, California. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's boots slipped in the mud as she dragged herself toward the finish line, every muscle screaming in protest. The obstacle course stretched behind her like a graveyard of her ambitions, conquered walls, crossed ropes, and cleared trenches that had taken everything she had to complete. But she was too slow, again. Time, the instructor's voice cut through the downpour like a knife. Chief Petty Officer Martinez clicked his stopwatch and shook his head, rain dripping from the brim of his cover. He didn't need to say anything. His expression told Sarah everything she needed to know. Failed, 5th time in 3 weeks. Sarah bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come fast enough. Her lungs burned. Her legs trembled. Behind her, she heard the victorious shouts of male trainees celebrating their successful runs. Jackson had finished 3 minutes ahead of her, Torres 2.5. Even Morrison, who twisted his ankle on the rope climb, had beaten her time by 45 seconds. "Chen, report to the medical tent," Martinez said, his voice not unkind but tired, disappointed. He'd seen this story before and he knew how it ended. "I'm fine, Chief," Sarah managed between breaths. "That's an order, Lieutenant." Sarah straightened, every vertebra in her spine protesting. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and trudged toward the medical tent. As she passed groups of trainees, conversations died. Some looked away. Others stared with expressions that ranged from pity to barely concealed resentment. She heard the whispers. They weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. Why does she keep trying? She's holding back the whole program. This diversity push is going to get people killed. Each word landed like a physical blow, but Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw clenched, her face carefully blank. She perfected that expression over the past 6 months. Never let them see you break. Never give them the satisfaction. At the medical tent, a corpsman checked her vitals with professional efficiency. Blood pressure elevated, heart rate taking too long to recover, mild dehydration despite the rain soaking her uniform. He made notes on his tablet, and Sarah knew those notes would go into her permanent training file. More evidence of her inadequacy. "You're cleared," the corpsman said, "but you need to hydrate and rest." Rest? As if she could rest. As if she could close her eyes without seeing those disappointed faces, without hearing those whispers, without feeling the weight of being one of only 3 women attempting the Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman pipeline since it had opened to women 2 years ago. The other 2 had already dropped out. Sarah was the last one standing, or rather the last one failing. She walked to her barracks as the sun set behind storm clouds, turning the sky a bruised purple. Her roommate, Lieutenant Jessica Parks, a Navy helicopter pilot, looked up from her laptop as Sarah entered, dripping rain water onto the linoleum floor. "That bad?" Jessica asked softly. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. If she spoke, something inside her might crack open, and she wasn't sure she could put it back together. Instead, she grabbed her towel and headed to the showers. The hot water stung against skin rubbed raw by wet uniforms and equipment harnesses. Sarah pressed her forehead against the tile wall and finally allowed herself to feel everything she'd been suppressing. The pain, the humiliation, the crushing weight of failure. She'd been top of her class at the Naval Academy. She'd scored in the 99th percentile on every written exam in her career. She could navigate by stars, calculate firing solutions in her head, and speak 3 languages. Her tactical analysis had earned praise from admirals. None of it mattered here. Here, she couldn't carry a 200-pound boat dummy fast enough, couldn't complete the obstacle course in the required time, couldn't match the physical standards set by men who had 50 pounds of muscle mass on her. The standards were the standards, she'd been told. Fair was fair. If she couldn't meet them, she didn't belong in special warfare. But was that true, or was fair just another word for designed for someone else? Sarah turned off the water and dried mechanically, her mind churning. She'd sacrificed everything for this opportunity. Her relationship with David had ended after 6 months. He couldn't handle the long absences and the physical toll the training took on her. Her parents, Chinese immigrants who dreamed of their daughter becoming a doctor or lawyer, had stopped asking about her career. Her college friends had drifted away, unable to relate to her military life. She'd given up everything normal and safe for this chance to prove women could serve in special warfare roles. And she was failing. Back in her room, Jessica had tactfully disappeared to give her privacy. Sarah sat at her desk in her PT shorts and navy t-shirt, her laptop glowing in the gathering darkness. She opened a new document and started typing. To Commander, Special Warfare Training Command. Subject, request for voluntary disenrollment. Sir, I hereby request voluntary withdrawal from the Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman Training Pipeline. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked, waiting, mocking. 3 years of preparation, the extra PT sessions, the swimming miles in cold ocean water, the studying and sacrifice, all coming down to this moment. This letter. This admission of defeat. Sarah's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. She was so tired, tired of failing, tired of being watched, judged, whispered about, tired of being the test case, the diversity initiative, the woman who proved women couldn't hack it. Maybe they were right. Maybe she should quit before she was officially dropped, before the failure became permanent in her record. At least voluntary withdrawal looked better on paper. She could return to regular Navy service, maybe get a good assignment on a destroyer or in intelligence, have a normal career, a normal life. Her hands returned to the keyboard. She continued typing, each word feeling like a surrender. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she'd submit the letter. Tomorrow she'd stop fighting this impossible battle. Tomorrow she'd admit what everyone else already knew. She was done. Sarah saved the document, closed her laptop, and lay down on her rack, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Rain continued to drum against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, she heard trainees laughing, celebrating their successful day. She closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. It never did anymore. Instead, she lay there in the darkness, feeling like she was drowning on dry land, waiting for tomorrow when she could finally stop fighting the tide. What Sarah didn't know was that tomorrow would change everything. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her fail and had seen something completely different. What she didn't know was that 3 words were about to transform her entire life. But tonight, in the darkness and the rain, she only knew one thing. She was finished. Commander Marcus Ghost Reynolds stood in the shadows of the observation tower, invisible to the trainees below. He'd perfected the art of invisibility over 15 years in naval special warfare, hence the nickname. Ghosts saw everything and were seen by no one until they wanted to be. Right now, he was watching Lieutenant Sarah Chen fail her 5th combat readiness test. Reynolds was 42 years old, though his face looked older. 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, and countless classified operations in places the public would never hear about had etched lines around his eyes and threaded silver through his dark hair. He'd been awarded 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart he never wore. He'd lost friends, made impossible decisions, and learned that war revealed truths about people that peacetime never could. The Navy had pulled him from active rotation 3 months ago to serve on an evaluation committee, reviewing the integration of women into special warfare programs. Most of the committee members had already formed their opinions before reviewing a single file. Reynolds had simply watched and said nothing, which was his way. Now, through high-powered binoculars, he observed Chen collapse in the mud 50 meters from the finish line. Chief Martinez was clicking his stopwatch, shaking his head. The other trainees were celebrating their completions, some glancing back at Chen with expressions Reynolds had learned to read like a language. Pity, contempt, relief that they weren't her. But Reynolds wasn't looking at what Chen had failed to do. He was looking at what she had done. He lowered the binoculars and picked up a tablet, pulling up footage from Chen's previous 4 failed tests. The Navy recorded everything now, every training evolution, every test, every moment. It was supposed to be for safety and legal protection, but Reynolds found other uses for it. He scrolled back to Test 3, a simulated maritime hostage rescue. Chen's team had been tasked with clearing a mock oil rig of hostile forces. The scenario was designed to be overwhelming: too many enemies, too little time, multiple casualties. It was meant to test decision-making under impossible pressure. Reynolds watched the footage with professional detachment. Chen's team had been pinned down early by simulated enemy fire. The team leader, a massive trainee named Jackson, had frozen, unable to decide whether to push forward or fall back. Precious seconds ticked away. The mission was failing. Then Chen had moved. Reynolds paused the footage, rewound it, watched it again. While everyone else had been focused forward on the enemy positions, Chen had glanced around, assessing angles, cover points, tactical options. In 3 seconds, she'd seen what Jackson hadn't: a blind spot in the enemy's overlapping fields of fire. She hadn't asked permission. She'd simply moved, using hand signals to redirect 2 teammates to follow her. While Jackson remained paralyzed, Chen had flanked the enemy position, neutralized the threat, and created an opening for her team to advance. The mission had still failed. Chen's combat scores weren't high enough. She'd taken too long on the physical portions. By the numbers, she'd underperformed. But Reynolds had been in real combat. He knew that numbers on a range were different from bullets flying in reality. He'd seen muscle-bound warriors freeze when things went sideways, and he'd seen unlikely heroes emerge from chaos. Combat didn't care about your bench press. It cared whether you could think clearly when everything was falling apart. Chen could think. He pulled up Test 4. Another failure, this one on the obstacle course. Reynolds fast-forwarded through the beginning. Chen was competent but slow on the climbing portions. Nothing remarkable. Then came the rope traverse, 60 feet above a mud pit. A trainee named Morrison had slipped ahead of Chen, losing his grip. He'd managed to catch himself with one hand, dangling, panicking. Instructors were moving to intervene, but they were too far away. Morrison's grip was failing. Chen had been 10 feet behind him on the rope. She'd been on pace for possibly her best time yet. Not a passing time, but close. Reynolds watched as Chen made a choice in a fraction of a second. She'd accelerated forward, wrapping her legs around the rope with surprising technique, and extended her hand to Morrison. She'd talked him through regaining his grip, stabilizing himself, and continuing across. The instructors had marked it as good leadership and teamwork. But Chen had lost 45 seconds. That 45 seconds had been the difference between her closest attempt and another clear failure. Reynolds set down the tablet and walked to the window of the observation tower. Rain streaked the glass. Below, he could see Chen trudging toward the medical tent, alone, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Trainees parted around her like a river around a stone, avoiding contact. He'd seen that body language before. It was the posture of someone who decided to quit. Reynolds understood the arguments against her. The standards were the standards. Special warfare was no place for social experiments. The physical demands were real, unchangeable, rooted in operational necessity. Men had died when operators weren't strong enough, fast enough, capable enough. All valid points. Reynolds had made some of them himself earlier in his career. But 15 years of combat had taught him something the test scores never captured: the difference between qualification and capability, between checking boxes and completing missions, between looking like a warrior and being one. He'd served with operators who had perfect scores and folded under real pressure. He'd served with operators who barely passed selection and became legends. The tests measured something, but they didn't measure everything. And they especially didn't measure what Reynolds had seen in Sarah Chen. She had combat instinct, not the trained responses, those could be taught, but the deeper instinct, the thing that made someone glance at the right moment, notice the pattern others missed, make the right choice in the fraction of a second before thought was possible. That couldn't be taught. You either had it or you didn't. Chen had it. She just didn't know it. And worse, she was trying to succeed by becoming something she wasn't, by matching the physical capabilities of men who outweighed her by 50 pounds. She was fighting her nature instead of maximizing it. Reynolds had seen this before, though not often in special warfare. He'd seen it in indigenous fighters in Afghanistan, smaller men who couldn't match American operators in physical strength, but who moved through mountains like ghosts, who read terrain and threats with preternatural awareness, who survived by being smarter and more efficient rather than stronger. The best ones had learned to stop competing on strength and start competing on cunning. Chen was trying to win the wrong game. Reynolds checked his watch. 17:30 hours. Chen would be back in her barracks now, probably contemplating withdrawal. He'd seen the resignation in her posture, the defeat in her eyes. She'd quit tonight or tomorrow unless something changed. He made a decision. 15 years in special warfare had taught Reynolds that the best operators weren't always the obvious choices. Sometimes you had to see past the surface, past the test scores, past the conventional wisdom. Sometimes you had to trust your gut. His gut said Chen could be exceptional if someone taught her to stop fighting herself. Reynolds pulled out his phone and sent a text to his aide. Pull Chen's complete training file. Everything. Have it on my desk in 30 minutes. Then he opened his laptop and began drafting a training plan, unconventional, unauthorized, and exactly what Chen needed. He'd have to clear it with the command, pull some favors, maybe burn some political capital he'd been saving. Worth it. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Somewhere in those barracks, Sarah Chen was writing her resignation letter, convinced she was finished. She had no idea that Ghost Reynolds was just getting started. Tomorrow he'd find her. Tomorrow he'd deliver 3 words that would change everything. But tonight he had work to do, a warrior to save from her own misconceptions, a career to redirect, a soldier to teach that strength came in forms the tests couldn't measure. Reynolds smiled grimly at his laptop screen, fingers moving across the keyboard. This was going to be interesting. Sarah Chen sat on the wooden pier that extended into the Pacific Ocean, her resignation letter folded in the pocket of her jacket. It was 2100 hours, 9 p.m. in civilian time, and the base had settled into its evening rhythm. Lights glowed from barracks windows. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the rhythmic cadence of a late-night training run, voices calling out in unison. She'd once been part of that. Now she felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a world she could never truly enter. The ocean stretched before her, dark and endless under a clouded sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind the smell of salt and rain. Small waves lapped against the pier's supports, a gentle rhythm that should have been soothing but only amplified her loneliness. Sarah pulled the letter from her pocket, unfolded it, and read it again by the light of her phone. The words looked official, professional, final. I hereby request voluntary withdrawal from the Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman Training Pipeline, effective immediately. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. He'd called 3 days ago, speaking Mandarin as he always did when he wanted to express something important. Sarah, there is no shame in knowing your limits. Come home. Go to medical school like we planned. This military dream has gone far enough. Her mother had been gentler but no less clear. We worry about you, Bayabo. You sound so tired, so sad. Is this really what you want? Was it? Sarah wasn't sure anymore. She'd wanted it once, desperately. Wanted to prove that women could serve anywhere men could. Wanted to show that determination and intelligence could overcome physical disadvantages. wanted to be a pioneer, a trailblazer, an example for other women who'd come after her. But what if she was wrong? What if she was just wasting everyone's time, including her own? The pier creaked behind her. Sarah tensed, quickly folding the letter and shoving it back in her pocket. She turned to see a figure approaching through the darkness, tall, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd walked dangerous places and survived. As he stepped into the dim light cast by the pier's single lamp, Sarah's breath caught. Commander Marcus Reynolds. She'd seen him around the base, always watching from a distance, never interacting with trainees. The legendary Ghost, Reynolds, 3 combat deployments, Silver Star recipient, a walking myth among special warfare operators. Sarah scrambled to her feet, straightening to attention. "Sir." "At ease, Lieutenant." Reynolds' voice was gravelly, worn smooth by years of shouting over helicopter rotors and gunfire. He walked past her and sat on the edge of the pier, legs dangling over the side. After a moment, he patted the wooden planks beside him. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Sarah sat, careful to maintain a respectful distance, her heart hammering. Why was Commander Reynolds here? Had her resignation somehow already leaked? Was this an official order to withdraw? A courtesy dismissal before she could quit? Reynolds said nothing. He simply stared out at the ocean, his weathered face unreadable in the half-light. A minute passed, then another. Sarah's anxiety built with each second of silence. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Sir, if this is about my request to..." "You think you know why you're failing?" Reynolds' voice cut through the night, quiet but absolute. Sarah blinked. "Sir, you've analyzed it, haven't you? Broken it down, studied the metrics. You're smart, top of your class at the academy, 99th percentile on written exams. So you've calculated exactly why you're not making it." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes, sir. I lack the physical capacity to meet the standards. I've tried different training protocols, nutrition plans, recovery strategies. I've worked with strength coaches and you think that's the problem?" Reynolds turned to look at her for the first time. His eyes were dark, intense, and unsettlingly perceptive. "You think if you could just get stronger, faster, bigger, you'd pass?" "Sir, the standards are..." "I know what the standards are, Lieutenant. I helped write some of them." Reynolds looked back at the ocean. "I also know they don't tell the whole story. I've watched your tests, all 5 failures." Shame burned in Sarah's chest. Of course he'd watched. Everyone had probably watched, waiting to see the diversity experiment fail. "Sir, I understand if the command has decided to." "I didn't watch your failures, Chen. I watched you." Sarah fell silent, confused. "Test 3, Maritime Hostage Rescue. Your team leader froze. You flanked the enemy position without orders, created an opening, saved the mission. Test 4. Morrison was about to fall from the rope traverse. You sacrificed your time to stabilize him." Reynolds paused. "Today, you collapsed 50 meters from the finish. But before you went down, you pushed trainee Williams forward. He passed because of you." Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't thought anyone noticed that. "You have something, Lieutenant, something rare, something I've only seen in a handful of operators in 15 years of combat." Reynolds stood, brushing off his pants. "But you're trying to be something you're not. You're fighting the wrong battle." He started walking back down the pier, toward the shore. Sarah stood quickly. "Sir, I don't understand." Reynolds stopped and turned back. The lamp behind him cast his face in shadow, making him look exactly like his nickname. A ghost, barely there, yet impossible to ignore. "You think wrong," he said. 3 words, flat, declarative, absolute. Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. "Sir, what does that?" "Auxiliary training facility. 500 hours. Don't be late." Reynolds turned and continued walking, his footsteps fading into the darkness. "But sir, Sarah called after him. "Sir, what am I supposed to do?" Reynolds' voice drifted back from the shadows. "Stop thinking like them. Start thinking like you." Then he was gone. disappeared into the night like his namesake, leaving Sarah standing alone on the pier with more questions than answers. You think wrong. What did that mean? Wrong about what? The standards, her capabilities, her approach, everything. Sarah pulled the resignation letter from her pocket again, staring at it in the lamplight. The words she'd written with such finality an hour ago now seemed premature, uncertain, maybe even cowardly. You think wrong. It wasn't criticism, it was diagnosis. Reynolds had identified a problem Sarah hadn't even known existed. He'd seen something in her tests, in her failures, that no one else had seen. Something worth his time, something worth interrupting her resignation to address. Sarah looked at her phone. 21:15 hours. If she was going to show up at the auxiliary facility at 500, she needed to get some sleep. But if she was going to show up, that meant not submitting her resignation letter. That meant giving this one more chance. That meant trusting that a legendary SEAL commander saw something in her that she couldn't see in herself. The smart move was to quit, cut her losses, stop embarrassing herself and the Navy's integration program, go back to regular service where she'd succeeded before. But Sarah thought about Reynolds' eyes, intense, certain, challenging. She thought about his words. She thought about the fact that Ghost Reynolds, who could have spent his evening doing literally anything else, had tracked her down on this pier at night to deliver 3 cryptic words. You think wrong. Sarah looked at the resignation letter one more time. Then, in a single motion, she tore it in half, and half again, and again, until it was just pieces of paper scattered on the pier like confetti. She watched the wind catch the fragments and carry them over the edge into the dark water below. Okay, Commander, she whispered to the empty night. Let's see what you've got. Sarah pulled out her phone and set an alarm for 4:30. She had no idea what waited for her at the auxiliary training facility. No idea what Reynolds meant by, you think wrong. No idea if this would change anything or if she'd just be prolonging the inevitable. But for the first time in weeks, Sarah Chen felt something other than despair. She felt curious. And in that moment, curiosity was enough to keep her fighting for one more day. She walked back down the pier toward her barracks, her steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. Behind her, pieces of her resignation letter dissolved in the Pacific Ocean, sinking into the darkness, gone forever. Tomorrow at 500, everything would change. She just didn't know how much. Sarah arrived at the auxiliary training facility at 4:45 hours, 15 minutes early. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through possibilities of what Reynolds might say or do. The facility was a smaller gym on the far edge of the base, away from the main training areas. Most personnel didn't even know it existed. The lights were already on. Commander Reynolds stood in the center of the empty space, wearing simple PT gear, black shorts and a faded navy t-shirt that had seen better days. No rank insignia, no trident pin, just a man who looked like he'd been awake for hours. You're early, he said without turning around. Yes, sir. Good, that means you're curious. Curiosity keeps you alive longer than strength. Reynolds finally turned to face her. Come here. Sarah approached, her muscles tense with anticipation. Tell me why you failed yesterday, Reynolds said. Sarah had prepared for this. Sir, I lacked the physical capacity to complete the course in the required time. My upper body strength is insufficient for. Wrong, Reynolds' voice was sharp, cutting. Try again. Sarah blinked, thrown off balance. Sir, the times don't lie. I was 3 minutes too slow on. Chen, I didn't ask you to recite your test scores. I asked you why you failed. Reynolds stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. Think, really think. Why did you fail? Sarah's mind raced. What was he looking for? I'm not strong enough compared to the male trainees. Compared to them, Reynolds seized on the words. There it is. That's your problem. You're trying to compete with them on their terms. You think like them, train like them, approach every obstacle like them. And you know what happens? I fail, sir. You fail, Reynolds nodded. Because you're not them. You're never going to be Jackson with his 250-pound bench press. You're never going to be Tors with his 6'4" frame. And you know what? That's not a weakness. That's only a weakness if you keep trying to be them. Sarah felt something shift inside her, not understanding yet but the beginning of it. Sir, I don't understand what the alternative is. The standards are. The standards measure capability, not strategy. Reynolds walked to the corner of the gym where various equipment was set up, ropes, walls, weights, obstacles. Come here, see this wall. It was a standard climbing wall, 15 feet high. Sarah had conquered dozens like it, though never fast enough. Climb it the way you've been doing it, Reynolds ordered. Sarah approached the wall, gripped the holds, and began climbing. She used the technique she'd been taught: reach high, pull with arms, push with legs, repeat. It worked. She reached the top and dropped back down. Time 48 seconds, Reynolds said, checking his watch. Now watch. Reynolds approached the same wall. But instead of reaching for the high holds immediately, he stepped back, studied it for 3 seconds, then moved. His path up the wall was completely different. He used his legs more, his core for stability, and found holds Sarah hadn't even noticed. His hands barely pulled. They just guided him as his legs did most of the work. Time 22 seconds, Reynolds said, landing softly. I'm 20 years older than you and my shoulder's been reconstructed twice. But I was faster. Why? You used better techniques, sir. I used physics. Reynolds tapped his temple. Force equals mass times acceleration. You can't change your mass much, and there's a limit to your acceleration. But you can change the direction of force, the application points, the leverage. I didn't climb that wall with my arms, Chen. I climbed it with my brain. For the next 2 hours, Reynolds systematically deconstructed everything Sarah thought she knew about physical challenges. He taught her leverage principles that made boat carries easier. He showed her breathing techniques that increased endurance. He demonstrated how reading terrain and choosing the right path saved more energy than raw speed. The boat carry that destroyed you yesterday, Reynolds said, positioning a training dummy between them. You tried to muscle through it. Shoulders back, arms burning, fighting every step. Show me. Sarah gripped the dummy and lifted. Her technique was textbook: back straight, core tight, balanced load. Stop, Reynolds circled her. Feel that burn in your shoulders? That's wasted energy. You're fighting gravity straight on. Rookie mistake. He adjusted her position slightly forward, weight distribution changed, grip altered. Now try. The difference was immediate. The dummy felt lighter. The strain on her shoulders decreased. It's the same weight, Reynolds said, but you're working with physics instead of against it. Every obstacle, every test, every challenge, there's a smart way and a strong way. You've been choosing strong because that's what you see them do. But strong isn't your game, Chen. Smart is. They moved to the rope traverse that had cost her 45 seconds, helping Morrison. Reynolds demonstrated a technique that used leg wrap and core rotation to move faster with less arm strength. Watch, he moved across the rope with fluid efficiency. I'm barely pulling with my arms. It's all legs and momentum. Try it. Sarah attempted the technique. It felt awkward, unnatural. Again, Reynolds said. She tried again, still clumsy. Again. 45 minutes later, Sarah was moving across ropes with technique she'd never imagined possible. Her arms weren't burning. Her grip wasn't failing. She was using her body as a machine, every part working in concert instead of muscles fighting individual battles. Better, Reynolds said. It was the first praise he'd offered all morning. Now let's talk about combat scenarios. He pulled up footage from her third test, the maritime hostage rescue, where she'd flanked the enemy position. This, he said, pointing at the screen, this is what you did right. You didn't try to outshoot them. You outthought them. You saw the angle Jackson missed. Tell me why you saw it. Sarah studied the footage. I don't know, sir, I just noticed. You noticed because you weren't thinking about being the strongest shooter. You were thinking about completing the mission. Reynolds paused the video at the moment she'd made her move. This is tactical asymmetry. When you can't win with force, you win with position, with timing, with seeing what others miss. He pulled up more footage, moments from her other tests, where she'd made smart decisions that got buried under her slow times. You have combat instinct, Chen, natural situational awareness. You see threats and opportunities that others miss, but you've been so focused on matching their physical capabilities that you've been ignoring your greatest weapon. Reynolds tapped his temple again. This. Sarah felt something crystallizing in her mind, not just understanding but possibility. A different path, a different way to approach every challenge. For the next 3 weeks, Reynolds said, you're training with me every morning, 500 to 700. We're going to rebuild your approach to every test. I'm not going to make you stronger. I'm going to make you efficient. I'm not going to make you faster. I'm going to make you smarter. And I'm not going to turn you into them. He looked at her directly. I'm going to turn you into the operator you're actually capable of becoming. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion she hadn't expected. Sir, why are you doing this? Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Because I've seen too many good operators washed out for the wrong reasons. Because the Navy needs people who can think, not just muscle through. And because, he paused, because I've been in combat long enough to know that the strongest warrior doesn't always survive. The smartest one does. He handed her a water bottle. Drink, hydrate, be back here tomorrow same time. And Chen. Yes, sir. Stop trying to be them. They're not the standard you should be measuring yourself against. Reynolds headed for the door, then stopped and looked back. The only person you need to be better than is the version of yourself from yesterday. Sarah stood alone in the auxiliary gym, water bottle in hand, her entire worldview tilting on its axis. You think wrong. She finally understood what those 3 words meant. She'd been fighting to become someone else instead of maximizing who she already was. Tomorrow that changed. Tomorrow, Sarah Chen would start becoming herself. 3 weeks. 21 mornings of 500 training sessions with Commander Reynolds. 21 sessions of unlearning everything Sarah thought she knew and rebuilding it from the ground up. Now standing at the starting line of her 6th combat readiness test, Sarah Chen felt different. Not stronger, not faster, but different in a way that mattered more. Chief Martinez raised his stopwatch. Chen, you ready? Yes, Chief. Her voice was steady, calm, no tremor of doubt. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, go. Sarah exploded forward, but her explosion was controlled, calculated. The first obstacle was the wall climb. Instead of attacking it like she had before, all arms and desperate pulling, she approached it with the technique Reynolds had drilled into her. 3 seconds to read the holds. Then movement, legs driving, core stabilized, hands guiding rather than hauling. She flowed up the wall like water finding the path of least resistance. Over the top, down the other side, 21 seconds. She'd shaved nearly 30 seconds off her previous time. The rope traverse came next, Sarah's old nemesis. Before, she'd white-knuckled across it, arms screaming, grip failing. Now she approached it differently. She jumped, caught the rope, and immediately wrapped her legs in the pattern Reynolds had taught her. Leg wrap, core rotation, momentum transfer. Her arms were barely engaged. She crossed in 43 seconds. Her previous best had been 97. Trainees watching from the sidelines exchanged confused glances. Was that really Chen? The boat carry loomed ahead, the obstacle that had destroyed her most consistently. A 185-pound rubber boat dummy had to be carried 200 meters across sand. Sarah had never completed it in the required time. She approached the dummy, but instead of gripping it the standard way, she used Reynolds' technique. Weight distribution forward, leveraging her lower center of gravity for stability rather than fighting it. She lifted, adjusted, and started moving. Her shoulders weren't burning. Her breathing stayed controlled. She found a rhythm, step, breathe, and locked into it. The dummy felt heavy but not impossible. She wasn't fighting the weight. She was managing it. 100 meters. Her legs were steady. Her core was engaged. She was using proper biomechanics instead of brute force. 150 meters. She could hear Martinez shouting times, but she blocked it out. Focus on form. Focus on efficiency. Trust the technique. 175 meters. 190 meters. 200 meters. She set the dummy down and immediately turned to look at Martinez. His expression was unreadable, but his stopwatch told the story. Time 4 minutes 47 seconds. Martinez stared at the stopwatch as if it had malfunctioned. Chen, that's a pass. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Trainees who'd been watching stopped their conversations. Even the instructors monitoring other stations turned to look. Sarah had passed the boat carry, for the first time ever. Don't stop now, Lieutenant. Martinez's voice snapped her back. You've still got the course to finish. Sarah ran toward the next obstacle, adrenaline surging through her veins. The confidence Reynolds had been building in her crystallized into something solid, unshakable. She wasn't trying to be Jackson or Torres anymore. She was being Sarah Chen, and Sarah Chen could do this. The cargo net climb. She used her legs, reading the net's movement, timing her ascent to work with its sway rather than against it. Up and over in 34 seconds. The low crawl under barbed wire. She stayed low, kept her profile minimal, used efficient movement instead of panic scrambling. Through in 2 minutes 12 seconds. The final sprint, 100 meters to the finish line. Sarah's lungs were burning now, her legs heavy, but her mind was clear. She thought about everything Reynolds had taught her: efficient stride, controlled breathing, mental discipline over physical panic. She crossed the finish line and bent over, gasping. Martinez was already there, stopwatch in hand, staring at it with an expression somewhere between shock and something else. Respect, maybe. Total time, 18 minutes 31 seconds. He looked up at Sarah. Chen, that's a pass, that's a solid pass. Sarah straightened, hardly daring to believe it. Chief, can you repeat that? You passed, Lieutenant. Martinez extended his hand. Well done. Sarah shook his hand, her legs trembling not from exhaustion but from the sudden release of weeks of pent-up stress and doubt. She'd passed. She'd actually passed. Around her, the atmosphere shifted. Trainees who'd been dismissive before now looked at her with confusion and curiosity. How had the woman who'd failed 5 times suddenly passed? Some instructors were conferring in low voices, checking and rechecking scores as if searching for an error. Jackson approached, his massive frame blocking the sun. Sarah tensed, expecting criticism or resentment. Instead, he offered a nod of acknowledgement. Different technique on the boat carry, he said. Looked weird, but it worked. Where'd you learn that? Extra training, Sarah said simply. Well, it shows. Jackson paused, then added, respect Chen, that was a solid run. He walked away, and Sarah felt the shift in dynamics. She wasn't the charity case anymore. She wasn't the diversity experiment bound to fail. She was a trainee who'd figured something out and executed. Over the next week, Sarah retook 2 more tests. The combat scenario was her next challenge, the maritime hostage rescue simulation that had exposed her slow shooting scores before. But this time, Sarah approached it with Reynolds' tactical asymmetry principles. She didn't try to be the best shooter. She positioned herself to be the most effective operator. While Jackson charged forward with overwhelming firepower, Sarah moved to angles that controlled the battlefield. She didn't engage every target. She engaged the right targets at the right time. When the smoke cleared, her team had completed the mission 12 seconds under the time limit. Her personal shooting score was middle of the pack, but her tactical decisions had been textbook perfect. The instructors had to pass her. The mission was completed. The team survived. By the standards that actually mattered, she'd succeeded. Chen's different, she heard Tors say to Morrison during a break. I don't know what happened, but she's not the same trainee who was failing 3 weeks ago. She's thinking instead of just doing, Morrison replied. Watch her. She reads situations before she moves. It's like she's playing chess while we're playing checkers. The observation made Sarah smile. That was exactly what Reynolds had taught her, to play a different game on a different board. By the end of the 3rd week since her conversation with Reynolds on the pier, Sarah had passed 4 consecutive tests. Her scores weren't the highest. She still wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but she was competent, capable, and consistently successful. Word spread through the training facility. The instructors who'd expected her to wash out were forced to revise their assessments. The trainees who'd pitied her now trained alongside her as an equal. Even the base commander, Captain Harrison, took notice during a routine inspection. Lieutenant Chen, Harrison said, reviewing her recent test scores. Remarkable improvement. Your last 5 tests show a complete turnaround. What changed? Sarah glanced across the yard where Reynolds stood in shadows, observing as always. He gave her the slightest nod. I stopped trying to be someone I'm not, sir, Sarah answered. I learned to maximize my actual strengths instead of compensating for weaknesses that don't matter as much as I thought they did. Harrison studied her with keen eyes. And who taught you that? Experience, sir, and good mentorship. Harrison followed her glance toward Reynolds, understanding passing across his face. I see. Well, Lieutenant, keep up this performance. You're proving something important here. That evening, Sarah met Reynolds at the auxiliary facility for their daily training session. He was reviewing footage from her latest combat scenario test. You hesitated here, he said, pointing at the screen. 2 seconds. Cost you nothing this time, but in real combat 2 seconds is fatal. What were you thinking? I was trying to remember the right move instead of trusting my instinct, Sarah admitted. Exactly. You've learned the techniques. Now you need to internalize them until they're not techniques anymore, they're just how you move. Reynolds looked at her directly. You're passing tests now, Chen, that's good, but I'm not training you to pass tests. I'm training you to survive combat. Big difference. Yes, sir. The final qualification is in 2 weeks, 72-hour field exercise. Everything you've learned gets tested under real pressure, sleep deprivation, equipment failures, impossible choices. Passing individual tests won't be enough. Reynolds paused. You need to become this. Not do this. Become this. Sarah nodded, understanding the distinction. She'd made progress, but progress wasn't transformation. She'd learned to think differently. Now she needed to be different. We've got 2 weeks, Reynolds said. Let's make them count. As Sarah left the facility that night, she passed groups of trainees heading to evening chow. Some nodded to her. Others ignored her. A few still looked skeptical. She didn't care. She wasn't training for their approval. She was training to become the operator she was meant to be. The briefing room was packed with nervous energy. 24 trainees sat in rigid attention as Captain Harrison outlined the final qualification exercise, the gauntlet that separated those who'd earned the right to wear the special warfare insignia from those who'd come close but not close enough. 72 hours, Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. You'll be inserted onto San Clemente Island in 4-person teams. Your mission: locate and extract a high-value target from a hostile compound, then exfiltrate to your designated pickup zone. Simple on paper, hell in execution. He clicked a remote and a map appeared on the screen behind him. You'll face aggressive opposition forces played by active SEAL team members. Equipment will fail. Weather will not cooperate. Your team will take casualties. You will be cold, hungry, exhausted, and pushed beyond what you think your limits are. Harrison's eyes swept the room. Some of you will fail. That's not pessimism. That's statistics. Sarah sat in the second row, her notebook open, absorbing every detail. Beside her was Jackson, who'd been assigned as her team leader. Behind them were Morrison and Williams, the trainee she'd pushed forward during her fifth failed test. It was a solid team on paper. Jackson had the strength and firepower. Morrison had technical skills. Williams was fast and adaptable. And Sarah had something else. You deploy at 400 tomorrow, Harrison concluded. Use tonight to prep your gear and get your minds right. Dismissed. The room emptied in controlled chaos. Sarah caught Reynolds watching from the back corner. He gave her a single nod. No words, no encouragement, just acknowledgement. She was ready. The training was done. Now came the test. That night, Sarah triple-checked her equipment with methodical precision. Weapons cleaned. Radio batteries fresh. Medical supplies organized. Food and water carefully rationed. She'd learned from Reynolds that special operations succeeded or failed in the preparation. At 400, 4 helicopters lifted off from Coronado, carrying 6 teams toward San Clemente Island. Sarah sat in the darkness of the helicopter cabin, feeling the familiar vibration through her bones. Jackson sat across from her, eyes closed, mentally rehearsing. Morrison checked and rechecked his navigation equipment. Williams bounced his leg nervously. 2 minutes, the crew chief shouted over the rotor noise. The helicopter descended fast, flaring at the last second. The moment the skids touched dirt, teams scrambled out into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah's boots hit the ground running. They had 15 kilometers to cover before dawn, when the opposition forces would be fully active. The first 12 hours went according to plan. Jackson led them through rough terrain with confident navigation. They avoided 2 opposition patrols using good fieldcraft. They reached their observation position overlooking the target compound by 1600 hours, ahead of schedule. "Good work, team," Jackson said quietly. "We'll observe until nightfall, then move in." But at 2100 hours, everything changed. They were moving toward the compound through a ravine when simulated artillery fire erupted around them. Smoke grenades and loud simulators that mimicked explosions. Instructors playing opposition forces appeared on the ridgelines, blank ammunition firing from all directions. "Contact left," Morrison shouted. "Contact right," Williams echoed. They were in a kill zone, caught in a perfect ambush. Jackson immediately began returning fire, but Sarah saw the problem instantly. They were pinned. The longer they stayed, the more casualties they'd take. "Jackson, we need to move," Sarah called out. "Suppressing fire," Jackson ordered, his training taking over. But his suppressing fire wasn't suppressing anything. The opposition had superior positions and weren't budging. Then Jackson took a hit, a paint round to the chest. "I'm hit," Jackson called out, following the exercise protocols. He dropped to the ground, playing wounded. "Chen, you've got command." The words hit Sarah like cold water. Command. The team was hers. Morrison and Williams were looking at her, waiting for orders while simulated enemy fire poured down from 3 directions. Sarah's mind raced through options. The standard tactical response was to establish a base of fire and maneuver, but they didn't have the firepower or positions to make that work. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Then she saw it, something the opposition forces had missed because they were focused on the obvious routes. A narrow defile to their left, barely visible in the darkness, easily dismissed as impassable. But Sarah had studied the terrain during their approach. That defile connected to a parallel ravine that bypassed the ambush entirely. It violated standard protocol. You never moved into unknown terrain during contact. You fought from your position or retreated along known routes. But Reynolds' voice echoed in her head. When you can't win with force, you win with position. "Morrison, Williams on me. Bring Jackson," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. "We're going left." "Left," Williams shouted. "Chen, that's a dead end." "Trust me, move now." Sarah led them into the defile. Morrison and Williams dragging the wounded Jackson between them. The opposition forces were still firing at their previous position, not realizing they'd displaced. The defile was tight, barely wide enough for two people, but it worked exactly as Sarah had calculated. Within 90 seconds, they'd bypassed the entire ambush and emerged into the parallel ravine. "Holy shit," Morrison breathed. "How did you know that was there?" "I saw it on approach," Sarah said, already moving. "Opposition will realize we're gone in about 3 minutes. We need to cover ground fast." They moved quickly through the darkness, putting distance between themselves and the ambush site. An hour later, they reached a defendable position where they could treat Jackson's wounds and reassess. Jackson, still playing wounded but allowed to observe, looked at Sarah with new respect. "That was either brilliant or insane, Chen. Protocol says." "Protocol assumes we had equal forces and good positions," Sarah interrupted gently. "We had neither. I adapted to reality. By going into unknown terrain during contact. By using terrain the opposition dismissed as impassable." Sarah checked her map by red light. "We're actually closer to the objective now than we would have been on the standard route, and we avoided taking multiple casualties." Williams whistled softly. "Reynolds has been training you, hasn't he?" Sarah smiled slightly. "He taught me to play a different game." The next 48 hours were a blur of challenges. Equipment failures that forced improvisation. A simulated medical emergency that tested their first aid skills under pressure. Sleep deprivation that turned simple decisions into cognitive battles. Opposition forces that seemed to anticipate their every move. But Sarah kept the team moving, adapting, surviving. She didn't try to outmuscle the problems. She outthought them. When their radio failed, she used visual signals and terrain features to coordinate movement. When they ran low on water, she led them to a location she'd memorized from pre-mission maps. When opposition forces blocked their primary route to the extraction point, she found alternatives. Jackson, recovered from his wounds by hour 48, had taken a back seat to Sarah's leadership. At one point during a brief rest, he pulled her aside. "You know you're not supposed to be this good, right?" he said with a tired grin. "I'm not good," Sarah replied. "I'm just thinking differently." "Whatever you're doing, it's working. I've been through this exercise twice before, failed both times. This time feels different." At hour 68, they reached the target compound. The extraction required perfect coordination, simultaneous breach, room clearing, target identification, and exfiltration under fire. Sarah divided responsibilities, positioning each team member based on their actual strengths rather than standard roles. The breach went flawlessly. They cleared the compound in 4 minutes, secured the hostage, and began their exfiltration. Opposition forces converged from all directions, but Sarah had anticipated this. She'd positioned their route to use natural choke points that negated the opposition's numbers advantage. At hour 71, they reached the extraction point. The helicopter was inbound. Opposition forces were closing in. They had to hold for 3 minutes. "Defensive positions," Sarah ordered. "Morrison north, Williams south, Jackson with me on the west approach, overlapping fields of fire. Wait for my command to engage." The opposition forces came hard, trying to overrun them before extraction. But Sarah had positioned her team perfectly. They fought from superior positions, using disciplined fire control, making every simulated round count. The helicopter touched down. "Go, go, go," Sarah shouted. They scrambled aboard as simulated enemy fire erupted around them. The helicopter lifted, and they were clear. Mission complete. 71 hours and 43 minutes, one of the fastest times in the exercise's history. As the helicopter banked toward Coronado, Sarah looked at her exhausted teammates. Jackson was grinning despite his fatigue. Morrison and Williams were already falling asleep. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the vibration of the helicopter. and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd done it not by being stronger, not by being faster, but by being smarter. Reynolds had been right, she'd been thinking wrong. Now she was thinking right. And everything had changed. The after-action review room was silent except for the hum of the projector. 12 instructors sat around a conference table, their faces illuminated by the glow of tactical footage from the 72-hour exercise. Captain Harrison sat at the head, Commander Reynolds stood in the back corner like a shadow, and Sarah Chen sat alone in the front row, still in her field uniform, dirt and sweat evidence of what she'd endured. Her team had been dismissed. This review was for Chen alone. Chief Martinez clicked through footage of the ambush where Jackson had been hit and Sarah had taken command. The room watched in tense silence as the tactical situation played out on screen. The opposition forces, the kill zone, Sarah's decision to move into the defile. The footage ended. Martinez looked up. That maneuver violated every protocol in the handbook. She moved into unknown terrain during active contact, abandoning established doctrine. Lieutenant Commander Pierce, a veteran SEAL instructor with 20 years of experience, leaned forward. Not only that, but she made the decision in under 10 seconds. No consultation with her team, no consideration of standard responses. She just improvised. Improvised successfully, someone noted quietly. This time, Pierce shot back. But doctrine exists for a reason. It's written in the blood of operators who learned hard lessons. We can't graduate someone who thinks the rules don't apply to her. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She'd known this was coming. Her success didn't matter if they decided her methods were too unconventional, too risky, too different from how things had always been done. Captain Harrison studied the frozen image on the screen. Chen, explain your decision-making during that contact. Sarah stood, her legs stiff from 3 days of continuous movement. Sir, the standard tactical response to an ambush is to establish a base of fire and execute a flanking maneuver. But that assumes relative parity in force and positioning. We had neither. The opposition held superior ground on 3 sides. Any attempt to fight from our position would have resulted in multiple casualties and mission failure. So you ran, Pierce said flatly. I maneuvered to a position of advantage, Sarah corrected, keeping her voice respectful but firm. The defile wasn't unknown terrain. I'd observed it during our approach and assessed it as passable. The opposition had dismissed it, which made it our best option for breaking contact without casualties. You got lucky, Pierce insisted. I made an informed tactical decision based on terrain analysis, enemy positioning, and available options. Sarah met his eyes. Sir, with respect, luck is what happens when you make decisions based on doctrine instead of reality. The room erupted in low conversation. Some instructors nodded thoughtfully. Others looked outraged at her challenge to established protocol. Enough, Harrison said, raising a hand. The room quieted. Let's continue the review. They analyzed the next 48 hours in excruciating detail. Every decision Sarah had made was scrutinized, questioned, debated. Her water source selection, unauthorized deviation from planned routes. Her communications workarounds when the radio failed, creative but non-standard. Her final assault plan, effective but unconventional. Martinez pulled up comparative data. Chen's team completed the exercise in 71 hours, 43 minutes. That's the 3rd fastest time this year. 0 casualties. Mission complete. By every measurable outcome, it was a successful operation. But at what cost to unit cohesion and doctrine compliance? Pierce argued. If every operator decided to improvise based on their personal assessment, we'd have chaos. The strength of special operations is our shared training, shared doctrine, shared language. Chen operated outside that framework. She operated within the framework of mission success. Reynolds spoke for the first time, his gravelly voice cutting through the debate. Everyone turned to look at him. which is the only framework that matters in combat. Pierce turned to face Reynolds. Commander, with respect, doctrine. I helped write the doctrine, Lieutenant Commander. Reynolds stepped forward into the light. I wrote it based on 15 years of combat experience, and you know what that experience taught me. Doctrine is a foundation, not a cage. The best operators know when to follow it and when to adapt beyond it. He clicked the remote, pulling up footage from a different angle, the opposition force's perspective during the ambush. Watch this. The SEAL instructors playing enemy forces had Chen's team dead to rights. Perfect ambush, perfect positioning. By the book, Chen's team should have been wiped out. He paused the footage. Now watch what happens. The footage played. Sarah's team disappeared into the defile. The opposition forces maintained fire on empty positions for 15 seconds before realizing their targets were gone. Confusion rippled through their ranks. By the time they'd repositioned, Chen's team was beyond pursuit range. The opposition forces are some of our best operators, Reynolds continued. They know every tactic we teach. They can predict and counter every doctrinal response. Chen did something they didn't predict because she didn't rely on doctrine. She assessed, adapted, and acted. That's not luck. That's not chaos. That's superior tactical thinking. So we should just throw out the doctrine? Pierce asked skeptically. No, we should recognize that doctrine trains you for 90% of situations, and superior operators handle the other 10%. Reynolds looked directly at Pierce. Combat doesn't care about our protocols. It cares whether you complete the mission and bring your people home. Chen did both. Harrison held up a hand, stopping Pierce's retort. Commander Reynolds, you've been observing Lieutenant Chen's training for months. You've even been conducting supplemental training sessions with her. Why? Because I saw something worth developing, sir. Something rare. And what was that? Combat instinct combined with tactical intelligence. Reynolds pulled up more footage, moments from earlier tests where Sarah had made decisions that saved her team at the cost of her own scores. Chen has something we can't teach: situational awareness under pressure and the willingness to make hard choices. I just taught her to stop fighting against her nature and start maximizing it. Harrison studied the footage thoughtfully. The room remained silent, waiting. The question before us, Harrison said slowly, is not whether Chen followed protocol. The question is whether she's capable of being an effective special warfare operator. Those are not always the same question. He stood, walking to the screen where Sarah's successful extraction was frozen in frame. I've seen strong operators fail because they couldn't adapt. I've seen by-the-book operators get people killed because they couldn't think beyond their training. He turned to face the room. And I've seen unlikely warriors become legends because they found their own path to excellence. The tension in the room was suffocating. Chen's methods are unconventional, Harrison continued, but her results are undeniable. Fastest time, 0 casualties, mission complete. She led a team through impossible circumstances and succeeded where others failed. He paused. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need in special operations. Operators who can adapt, improvise, and win against superior forces. Pierce opened his mouth to object, but Harrison raised a hand. I'm not finished. Chen didn't just succeed. She proved that there are multiple paths to mission success. She demonstrated that intelligence and adaptability can compensate for physical limitations. And most importantly, she showed that an operator's value isn't measured solely by how well they follow protocols, but by whether they complete the mission. Harrison looked at Sarah directly. Lieutenant Chen, you are unconventional, unpredictable, and you make traditionalists uncomfortable. You also just completed one of the most tactically sound field exercises I've reviewed in 20 years of evaluations. He smiled slightly. That's exactly what special warfare needs. The words hung in the air. Chen passes, Harrison declared. Full qualification, she's earned it. The room exploded in conversation. Some congratulatory, others still skeptical, but the decision was made. Sarah felt her knees weaken with relief. She'd done it. Actually done it. Martinez approached her, extending his hand. "Congratulations, Chen. You proved a lot of people wrong, including me." Sarah shook his hand, too overwhelmed to speak. Other instructors filed out, some nodding to her, others avoiding eye contact. Reynolds remained in the back, watching. When the room had mostly cleared, Sarah approached him. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly, "for everything." "I didn't do anything, Chen. I just helped you see what was already there." Reynolds paused. "You did the work, you made the choices, you earned this." "The 3 words you said that night on the pier, 'You think wrong,' they changed everything." "No, you changed everything. I just pointed you in the right direction." Reynolds headed for the door, then stopped. "Chen, you're going to face skeptics your entire career. People who think you got here through quotas or luck. Prove them wrong every single day. Not by being like them, by being better than them in your own way." "Yes, sir." Reynolds nodded and left. Sarah stood alone in the empty review room, staring at the screen still showing her successful extraction. 6 months ago, she'd been on a pier ready to quit. Now she was a qualified special warfare operator. She'd stopped trying to be someone else. She'd become herself. And that had made all the difference. 6 months later, the Persian Gulf shimmered under a relentless sun. Special warfare combatant craft crewman Sarah Chen stood on the deck of a Mark V special operations craft, her hand resting on the mounted weapons system as the boat cut through the water at 40 knots. The mission brief had been simple: insert a SEAL team for a time-sensitive intelligence operation, maintain overwatch, and extract under potential hostile fire. Simple on paper, complex in reality. Chen's status. Lieutenant Kyle Brennan, the boat's commanding officer, called from the helm. Sarah scanned the coastline through her tactical scope. Clear on approach vector, no visible threats, but the intel says insurgents have been active in this area. "Trust your gut," Brennan said. It was something he'd learned to say to her over the past 6 months. Chen's instincts had proven reliable more times than anyone could count. The SEAL team inserted cleanly, disappearing into the coastal darkness. Sarah's boat took up a position 300 meters offshore, engines idling, weapons ready. The waiting began, the part of operations that tested nerves more than action ever did. 20 minutes into the wait, Sarah saw it. A flicker of movement on a rooftop that didn't match the pattern of local civilians. Then another. Her tactical mind processed the information instantly, positioning, angles, intent. "Brennan, we've got watchers. North rooftop 200 meters inland. They're tracking our position." Brennan looked through his own scope. Could be civilians. Civilians don't coordinate positions with hand signals. Sarah zoomed in. And that's a radio in his hand, not a phone. Brennan trusted her assessment. Alert the SEAL team, possible compromise. Sarah keyed her radio just as gunfire erupted from the insertion point. The SEAL team was in contact, taking fire from multiple positions. And now Sarah understood. The rooftop watchers had been calling in reinforcements. "All units, this is Overwatch. Team is compromised. We've got hostiles massing on their exfil route," Sarah transmitted, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "Can you interdict?" The SEAL team leader's voice crackled through the radio, punctuated by gunfire. Sarah analyzed the tactical picture in seconds. Standard protocol said maintain position, provide fire support from the boat. But the geometry was wrong. From their current position, they couldn't hit the threats massing on the SEAL team's route without risk of hitting friendlies. She saw a different option, a better option, a Sarah Chen option. "Brennan, we need to reposition. There's a peninsula 500 meters south that gives us direct line of sight on their exfil route. We can cut off the insurgent reinforcements." "That's outside our authorized patrol zone," Brennan said, but his tone indicated he was considering it. The authorized zone doesn't account for the tactical reality, Sarah said, Reynolds' lessons echoing in her mind. We can either follow the patrol plan and watch them get overrun, or we can adapt and save lives. Brennan made his decision. Helm, take us south. Chen, you better be right about this. I am, sir. The boat roared toward the peninsula, arriving in 90 seconds. Sarah immediately engaged the insurgent reinforcements from their new position, perfectly angled shots that stopped the enemy advance without endangering the SEAL team. The insurgents, caught in an unexpected crossfire, broke and scattered. Overwatch, that's outstanding work, the SEAL team leader transmitted. We're moving to exfil now. See you in 2 mics. The extraction went smoothly. As the SEAL team climbed aboard, their leader, a grizzled chief petty officer named Ramirez, approached Sarah. That repositioning saved our asses, Chen. How'd you see that angle? Sarah smiled. Someone taught me to think differently. 2 weeks later, back at Coronado, Sarah was walking across the base when she noticed a young woman sitting alone on a bench near the training facility. The woman wore trainee PT gear, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah recognized that posture. She'd worn it herself 6 months ago. She approached quietly and sat down, saying nothing at first. The young woman looked up, startled, then quickly wiped her eyes. Sorry, ma'am, I didn't see you. Don't apologize for feeling, Sarah said gently. What's your name? Petty Officer Second Class Emma Rodriguez, ma'am. The woman's voice was thick with defeat. I just failed my 4th qualification test. I don't think I can do this. Sarah's heart clenched with recognition. What makes you think that? I'm not strong enough, not fast enough. I've tried everything, but I can't match the guys. Maybe everyone's right. Maybe women just aren't built for this. Rodriguez looked at Sarah's uniform, seeing the special warfare insignia. Her eyes widened. Wait, you're Chen. You're the one who made it through. I am. And 6 months ago, I was sitting exactly where you're sitting, thinking exactly what you're thinking. But you figured it out. You got strong enough. No, Sarah shook her head. I never got strong enough. I got smart enough. I stopped trying to be them and started being the best version of me. Rodriguez looked confused. I don't understand. Sarah settled in. Let me tell you about 3 words that changed my life. A SEAL commander found me on a pier when I was about to quit. I'd failed 5 tests. Everyone thought I was done. I thought I was done. And he said 3 words to me. You think wrong. Over the next 30 minutes, Sarah shared her story. The failures, the shame, Reynolds' unconventional training, the realization that she'd been fighting the wrong battle, the 72-hour exercise that proved everything. Rodriguez listened with growing hope in her eyes. You're trying to match their strength, Sarah explained. But that's not your game. What are you actually good at? Not what you wish you were good at. What are you actually good at right now? Rodriguez thought, I'm really good at reading situations, and I'm fast at processing information. My test scores are always high. There you go, you're a tactical thinker, so stop trying to outmuscle obstacles and start outthinking them. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm going to give you my number. Tomorrow morning, 5:30, meet me at the auxiliary training facility. I'm going to teach you what Commander Reynolds taught me. You'd do that. Someone invested in me when I needed it most. I'm paying it forward. Sarah stood. But Rodriguez, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to make it easy. It's just going to make it possible. You'll still have to do the work. You'll still have to fight, but you'll be fighting the right battle. Rodriguez stood as well, hope replacing despair on her face. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be there. As Rodriguez walked away with renewed purpose, Sarah felt a familiar presence. She turned to find Commander Reynolds standing 20 feet away, observing from the shadows as he always did. He approached, nodding with approval, teaching her the lesson. Paying it forward, sir, like you did for me. That's how it works, Chen. One generation of warriors teaches the next, not just the techniques but the mindset. Reynolds paused. You know, when I found you on that pier, I took a risk. A lot of people thought I was wasting my time, that you'd wash out anyway. What made you take that risk? I saw something in you that reminded me of myself 20 years ago, someone fighting the wrong battle, too stubborn to quit but too blind to see the real solution. Reynolds smiled slightly. Plus, I'm old enough to know that the warriors who change everything are usually the ones nobody expected to make it. Sarah looked toward where Rodriguez had disappeared around a corner. Do you think she has what it takes? I think she has you as a mentor, that's half the battle. Reynolds turned to leave, then stopped. Chen, you've proven yourself operationally now. You're not the experiment anymore. You're just an operator, a damn good one, remember that. Yes, sir. Reynolds walked away, fading into the shadows. Sarah stood alone in the California sunshine, feeling the weight of her journey and the promise of Rodriguez's future. 6 months ago, she'd been broken, ready to quit, convinced she'd never measure up. Now she was a qualified operator with combat experience, mentoring the next generation, proving that excellence came in many forms. You think wrong. 3 words that had saved her career. 3 words that had taught her to stop trying to be someone else. 3 words that had shown her the path to becoming exactly who she was meant to be. And now, those 3 words would save another warrior, who just needed someone to believe in her and show her a different way. Sarah checked her watch. She had training to prepare for Rodriguez, techniques to review, lessons to organize. The work of building a warrior wasn't done in a day. But it started with 3 words. And it started tomorrow at 5:30. Sarah smiled, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the auxiliary training facility. Behind her, the main training course echoed with the sounds of trainees struggling, fighting, learning. One of those trainees would be Rodriguez soon, discovering that strength wasn't about matching others. It was about maximizing yourself. And that made all the difference.
Ark. Ozino, sei bello come il sole, bello come la luna che ieri sono riusciti a vedere da dietro. Bello come l'aggiornamento costante che mi faceva Ozino su quello che faceva ieri la NASA. È stato veramente figo, tra l'altro. Se non fosse stato per lui non l'avrei neanche visto, me ne sarei battuto i coglioni. Invece è stato molto molto bello. Grazie, Patato. Sempre più prima donna, sempre di più. Mi sento di aver perso 20 diottrie. Ah, da mo' l'avevi cambiato, ma va. Sai tesoro che non mi ricordavo? Sì.